right, already the IEC is seeking a postponement of the latest round of by-elections. The Commission is citing the pandemic and strict regulations limiting gatherings as some of the reasons for this type of consideration. Now, if the polls were to be delayed, what are the implications? Well, let's unpack this. We'll bring in political analyst Dr. Ralph Matsecha, who joins us via our telephone line, as well as Professor Berry Hanyane, who joins us via our video link. To both of you, thanks very much for your time and welcome to the program. Professor Hanyane, perhaps let me begin with you. From a logistical point of view, what does a postponement of the elections look like, practically speaking? Does that mean that disgruntled communities have to put up with those who've been put in power for much longer than they would have otherwise had to?
And good afternoon. Good afternoon to your viewers as well. I think this would be cumbersome, especially on the part of the IEC, where we've learned already that preparations are underway to make sure that these elections actually go through. I'm excited to take note of the fact that coming from the IEC, the suggestion that for once we could see pockets of experimenting with electronic voting, that I would welcome and I would like to see that happening. However, let's not forget the fact that there is currently a constitutional ruling that actually forces the IEC to relook at national polls in 2024, which then says to us that any suggestion to combine the two would extremely make things difficult for the IEC, let alone the voters who are eagerly anticipating to cast their votes come this year between the 3rd of August and the 3rd of November.
Yeah, Dr. Matsecha, of course, election time is also a great time for electioneering, and that simply can't happen during a global health crisis. But do you think that's enough of a reason for the elections not to go ahead, though? The fact that, candidates can't essentially go about their campaigning in conventional ways, because now we know there are, of course, alternatives.
Afternoon, and afternoon to Prof. Hanyane. Look, we are under very difficult circumstances. There is no doubt about it. We cannot try to continue with business as usual. We know that we live under restrictions. To some extent, one can say our politics is quite frozen to some extent because events that we have known that used to be physical events through which people were meeting, political processes were taking place, are no longer taking place. People are adapting to new ways, of course, but it all shows that these are very difficult and different circumstances. And be that as it may, I think that our point of entry into this should be about what is it that perhaps we need to adjust in order to make sure that people continue to express their freedom. Remember, the right to vote is very much fundamental. Imagine if people have been voted for a mandate of 5 years, then elections are postponed. What kind of government are you going to have into place? Is it government of national unity? How are you going to put it together? And who is going to decide upon it? Are the voters going to be allowed to decide? And if the voters are going to be allowed, why wouldn't we use that to have elections? So you're facing real complex issues here, and I think that it's not a simple issue of postponing the elections. I think we should start by saying under what conditions can we try to have free and fair elections? They are not going to be normal, but other nations have tried that. I mean, Uganda just had their elections, controversial as they are. South Korea, other countries have used technology, a hybrid model, to try to have elections. And we should also ask, can we maintain social distancing? Maybe let's have the elections over a week, maybe. I think we should start there instead of starting by proposing that we suspend this fundamental right, which is the right to vote.
Yeah, I'm actually of the view that we already have a blueprint of what this could look like in South Africa. The by-elections that were held, if not earlier this year, late last year, have already kind of given us a scaffolding in which we can start, I guess, filling in the different details. But Professor Hanyane, if we were to have the elections under these circumstances where there are a whole lot more questions than answers, are we confident in things like whoever's elected being elected legitimately so? Because there are so many holes to pick, so to speak, many critics are, I guess, advantaged by that because, they could easily point at those holes to question the credibility of whatever poll we have later this year.
And I'm glad in your question you use the word credibility, which I suspect and I think it is central to running free and fair elections. Give people access, make sure that the process is transparent, make sure that all in sundry are able to account for the process, in particular the IEC. As Dr. Mateja says, let's not hold back on the possibility of experimenting with user-friendly mechanisms that may have been used elsewhere globally, or would rather revolutionize the whole system, ensure that we build into it modalities that can work, modalities that can inform the election process itself. Look at Namibia, for instance. They've been experimenting with electronic voting for quite some time, with less glitches to report. Why not take cues from that? I'm confident that the IEC has the mettle, has the appetite, and of course, somewhat of a capacity to make sure that they deliver an election like no other before. My other concern is the possible increase of independent candidates. With that in mind, surely the ballot box, the ballot paper rather, may be extended. And if you handle that electronically, such a challenge can be handled going forward.
Well, I think what makes it particularly challenging at this time is the IEC actually battling budget cuts when it needs to spend more money on things like PPE. But perhaps that's a conversation to be had with the IEC. Dr. Mateja, you mentioned that, because of where we are, it almost feels like our politics are frozen. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I mean, if you just look at the Sunday papers today, they sprinkled with remarks from the president who, to me, appears to be on some kind of media bonanza frenzy, whatever term you want to use, engaging now particularly with media houses, almost packaging it as a one-on-one engagement. Do you think this is where politics should be headed as we deal with the pandemic?
Well, it's trying times for political actors. They are trying out new ways, giving press conferences where there is no one there. They are used to being surrounded and so forth, and now they are going to face the camera and so forth. So it's trying times. There are different ways that are being attempted here. But when I say our politics are to some extent frozen, I'll just point to the governing party, for example, their policy conference. We don't know when is it coming. It is a major day on the political calendar of the ANC, and given the current political climate within the party, given the differences and the level of factionalism, the standoff regarding the Integrity Commission and so forth, one would imagine that perhaps big gatherings such as that will bring a closure or direction on certain things. But you cannot have it, and you're going to try to have it in this new model. Members will be suspicious whether is it going to work or is it going to be rigged and so forth. And I think this is where I think Prof is pointing to something very important. They use the term experimenting. The IEC is almost there when it comes to digitizing this information. Perhaps we should, look at opportunities to say that if there are any opportunities, perhaps it's for us to move in this digital world. An opportunity here would be if people can vote in their homes on their smartphones, and we can verify that they are home when they are voting through some form of GPS. I'm just speaking off the top of my mind here. Wouldn't that encourage participation in the voting processes? I think that will be an opportunity. We should be thinking in that way. Let us not be nostalgic about the world we used to live in before the COVID.
Yeah, the question now, I guess, becomes, do we have enough time to get there? Because before we speak about an electronic system, we need to have a conversation about things like the digital divide in a country like South Africa. Professor Hanyani, do enough people even have smartphones to engage, online? Are there enough people who can be at home and vote through their phones when, in fact, a lot of experts are still questioning whether the use of a smartphone is as ubiquitous as it should be in a country like ours? Prof, are you still with us, Professor Hanyani?
Yeah, I lost you earlier on.
Makes sense.
I take it the question here is, is around the use of technology and connectivity.
Right, particularly
Look,
in a context particularly in a context where we're still constantly being reminded of what's called the digital divide. Not enough people appear to have access to the devices that would allow an electronic voting to take place in a country like ours.
And it all depends on how your technological highway, so to speak, would then have to be designed in mitigating against issues of lack of access. But it's not only that, it's the issues of capacity as well. We are now walking into the 5G technology mode, which one would argue may be of benefit to the IEC from a technological point of view. But again, it would be a question of saying, as a proposition, whether your peri-urban and urban areas may not be exposed to the use of technology and reserve the same when it comes to managing and handling these elections in much deeper rural areas, which again would put pressure in terms of manpower from the IEC to make sure that due process is followed. Thank goodness, the system alone is transparent. You also have party agents who must be there to oversee transparency and fairness and good management of these processes. So yes, technology is key. I'm interested in the blueprint that the IEC wants to present to us as a way of experimenting, particularly in the use of technology. You're quite right. With smartphones available, that could ease the pressure. But then, of course, there's other matters to consider in this respect.
Yeah, part of what needs to be considered is obviously whether or not there's buy-in from political parties themselves. We already heard from the EFF's leader, Julius Malema, very strongly pushing back against the idea of having an election this year, given what he feels are actually disadvantages given to all parties. Dr. Matega, do you think that's enough of a reason, right? The fact that the leaders themselves feel like they haven't been given an opportunity to bring their best foot forward, and that being a consideration to be made in possibly delaying this election?
Well, I under the basis of any free and fair election is an environment whereby political parties can campaign and access potential voters freely. And unfortunately, we don't have that environment now. But it's not like there is anyone who's making sure that a particular party does not access people. It is an equitable problem, or a problem that is equitably distributed across all political parties, across the society. What I'm trying to say is that the very same reason why the ANC cannot reach its potential voters is the very same reason why the EFF and the DA cannot do the same now. So this is where innovation comes in, where the social media. I mean, these leaders spend all the time on Twitter and come sunrise and sunset, and they talk to people all along. It is their platform of choice. And when one says that, well, you might need to say serious things on that platform now and try to talk to your voters on, they start decrying that, look, we cannot call that as a free and fair environment. I think that we need to be learning from what other countries are doing, and we also need to understand that perhaps maybe nature has a way to push us towards more efficiency, and we should approach it from that point of view. I think that the digital platform, with more education of the users and some kind of proper regulatory framework on the handling of the information and private information belonging to people, the digital platform in South Africa can actually be harnessed to help parties campaign.
Yeah, I can already hear some of the critics saying, yes, COVID-19 has affected everyone, but there are some who have the benefits of incumbency to give them an extra advantage. But let me thank you for your time. We can certainly have this conversation until the actual elections are held. So let me fold it there. Dr. Ralph Matega, thanks very much for your time. Professor Berry Hanyane, you too certainly appreciate your insights. Both our guests are political analysts.